Well, hi everyone, I'm Tightline Tim. It's great to be here today as we look at God's Word together. Well, there's a story of a guy called Septimus Harding. Now, he was a warden of a small hospital in a small rural English town. And at first for him, life was idyllic. He was working towards retirement. He lived with his devoted daughter, living a quiet life. The issue with Septimus is that he earned a ridiculous amount of money. Because of an antiquated estate arrangement, he earned far more money than the pensioners who were supposed to be looking after. Ridiculous amount of money, far more than someone like that would ever need. But what happened was there was this young reformer who came along and discovered this, and of course decided this was an outrage and exposed Septimus and the ridiculous amount of money that he was earning. His name was all over the newspapers, and it became a national scandal about church wealth. What struck me about this story is it's in a novel. It's from a novel called The Warden by Anthony Trollope. It was written over nearly 200 years ago. And a story like that feels so contemporary. A story of public shaming, especially of a Christian institution. We live now, especially, in a shame culture where saying the wrong thing can lead you to being shunned, cancelled, publicly cast out. Now, shame is an interesting thing. I think we tend to talk and think more about guilt, but shame is the idea less about that we're bad according to our own conscience, but that something is wrong with respect to other people. It's social. We're good or bad according to what other people think. And so it's that rising heat when you say something foolish in a meeting and you feel like you shouldn't be there. Or you walk into a room and realise this is not the place for you. Shame also says not just that we do bad things, but that we are a bad person. It's that deep sense of disgrace that says that you're actually not worthy. It keeps you awake at night. You know when maybe this is just me, you ruminate on those past failures that just can be from so long ago, but they just come back to haunt you again and again, telling you that you're not good enough. Make you feel like crawling into a hole. But most seriously, shame is what tells us that we don't belong with God, that we're not worthy of Him, that makes us hesitate to pray or step into church today because of who we are or what we've done. Now today, as we wrap up our series on encounters with Jesus encounters the Apostle Peter. And Peter has publicly failed and been deeply humiliated. But in this encounter, Jesus deals with Peter's shame. And so as we look together at this encounter, my hope is that we can have our shame exposed, but then dealt with graciously by Jesus Christ. Now, chapter 21 of John, which we just had a bit of it read, it's the final chapter in the Gospel of John, and it's sort of like an epilogue. It comes after Jesus' ministry, after his death and resurrection, even after he's appeared to his disciples. And now Jesus is appearing to his disciples again, and he's sort of tying up loose ends. And so this interaction with Peter is tying up a loose end about Peter, which is Peter's shame. Peter and some other disciples, they've gone back to fishing because that's what they were doing before they decided to follow Jesus. They've gone back to fishing, and suddenly Jesus appears and gives them this enormous, miraculous catch, 153 fish. For all you mathematicians out there, isn't it interesting that 153 is the sum of the cube of the integers, 153? So there you go, something to think about. It could just be, so maybe deeply symbolic, or maybe it's just 153 fish, who knows. They've gone back to fishing, this miraculous catch. They come back to shore, and Jesus is there. He's built a fire, he's fried up some fish and a bit of bread, and he invites them to come and sit down. And it's around this barbecue at the beach that Jesus confronts Peter. And he says, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Now, this is a pointed question. Peter was the one who always said that he would love Jesus. He's the one who, when Jesus said that he was going to die, he jumped up and said, "No, Jesus, not you." And then he was the one who said, "Well, before you die, I will die for you. I will follow you to death." But when the moment came, Peter had failed. And when Jesus was at his trial, Peter was around a fire in the courtyard just outside where Jesus was being tried. 3 times people asked him if he was a follower of Jesus, and 3 times Peter denied it. And so when that rooster crowed in the cold of the night, Peter was disgraced and he wept bitterly. And so each time Jesus asks Peter, "Do you love me?" around this fire, these 3 times, he exposes Peter's shame about his failure. Now, when I look around this room, I don't see many obvious failures. I'm starting to get to know you, and like any church community, you guys are mostly, as far as I can tell, successful, competent kinds of people. But so often, we're masking a deep sense of shame about things that we've said, disgraceful things that we've done, shame and over who we feel we are, about our bodies, about our families, secret habits. And so we tend to not let anyone see who we really are because we so want to hide these things. We so want to stop them from being exposed. But just like Jesus saw Peter, Jesus sees us, each of our failures, our deepest shames and disgraces. And he knows the truth. So often we also have, sitting alongside that shame, we can have a inflated self-confidence and even self-righteousness that says, no, nothing to see here. I've got nothing to be ashamed of. This is me, proudly for all to see. The Anglican prayer book in the communion service at the beginning of the service has a prayer that acknowledges God as the one before whom all hearts are open, all desires known, and from whom no secrets are hidden. And so we, like Peter, are truly bare before the gaze of Jesus. But what matters is how Jesus responds. And how does Jesus respond? With mercy. All this talk about Jesus' unwavering gaze can make it sound like it's an interrogation. But this is not Peter's interrogation. This is Peter's renewal. Around this fire with the smell of the coal and the smell of fish, this is a breakfast where Jesus welcomes Peter, speaks to his heart, and reinstates him publicly into a place of honour. And so 3 times when he asks that penetrating question, "Do you love me?" 3 times Peter says, "Yes, I do." And what does Jesus say? "Feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Feed my sheep." He's reinstating Peter back into a position of being an elder, a leader within Christ's church, despite all his failings, despite what he had done. And so notice that it's not just a private conversation. This isn't just Jesus and Peter. All the disciples, the 5 or 6 disciples who were there, had gathered around the fire. And they were all there to see it. And so if you were there, imagine you were there, one of the disciples. There are a number of you around the fire. And this conversation is happening right in front of you. You know what Peter did. And so you hear Jesus, you see Jesus confront him like this and then put him back into this place of honor. This is for all to see. Jesus is saying that Peter belongs and that Peter is honored and that Peter has purpose. Once more, he'll be that leading elder, and that's what he became. Now, we could spend more time speaking about what exactly it meant for Peter to be feeding his sheep. It was about that shepherding role, which then was particular for Peter and then carried on through elders in the church. But today, we're going to focus on Jesus' mercy to Peter. The way that Jesus removes his shame and reinstates him publicly. Now, this mercy of Jesus means two things for us. And the first is that we don't need to be ashamed. You don't need to be ashamed of your failures before Jesus. You don't need to be ashamed of your failures before Jesus. If you follow Jesus, he accepts you, welcomes you, just the way he did for Peter. Whether you have a hidden past that makes you want to bury your face in your hands, or you feel like a failure as a person, or you feel like you can't approach God, Jesus' mercy covers it all. When we talk about Jesus dying on the cross, very often we talk about him dying for our guilt, dying for our sin, but he also died for our shame. Remember the cross. Sometimes people say, well, why the cross? Couldn't Jesus have done it any other way? But I think one of the most distinctive things about the cross was how shameful it was. To the Jews, to die on a cross was to be cursed by God. To the Romans and the Greeks, to die on a cross was unmentionable. It was foolish. And so there on the cross, Jesus wasn't just bearing our guilt, but bearing that shame, that being exposed, of being ridiculed and disgraced. And then in his resurrection, he himself is crowned with glory and honor. And by raising us up to life, he crowns us with glory and honor. From shame to honor is the journey that he takes us. If you picture God, maybe this is a little blasphemous, but if you were to picture the face of God looking at you, what would it be like? I think a lot of Christians, too many Christians, might picture him as a bit like an angry father, kind of disgruntled, looking over the top of a newspaper at us like we're a naughty child. But that's not the case at all. It's more like a dad who's just arrived home and crouches down as you run to him and looks you steady in the face. When you see it in pets as well, but a child does something wrong and they know it's wrong and they're trying, but they just can't look you in the eyes. He lifts up our chin, stares us dead in the eyes, and says, "You are my beloved child. You belong with me. You are honoured." And so we don't need to be ashamed before him. But the second thing that it means is because God honours us, we can honour one another despite our shame. Just as Peter denied Jesus publicly, Jesus restores Peter publicly with others around that fire with the 5 other disciples. I think one of the barriers to building healthy relationships of peace and community can be our sense of shame. In one aspect is that we find it difficult to let others in too close because we might not want them to see the truth about who we think we are. And I think it's probably especially the case with blokes. But we need to learn to let that shame go and to let each other in. But there's another way I think this expresses itself is when we've had difficulty with someone else, when there's been a relational breakdown. Very often it's the shame that prevents us from being able to come back together. Whether it's somebody's hurt us or we've hurt someone else, It's that desire to avoid that awkward face-to-face thing again. We just want to avoid it. But if we're going to be a loving community that honours one another, we need to be able to get past that and restore those relationships despite the shame we might feel with one another. To reinstate each other in one another's lives, just as Christ has done for us. But Jesus isn't finished with Peter, and he hasn't finished with us. If you've got a sermon outline in front of you, you'll notice that my third heading is living shamefully for Christ. Now, someone said to me after the service at 8, they said, shouldn't that be living shamelessly? I'm like, well, I guess that kind of works, but I'm trying to be provocative here, but not just provocative, but also to get at the fact that the life of being a Christian is not supposed to be a life of glory and ease. In fact, it means being willing to be shamed for the sake of Christ. In verse 18, Jesus tells Peter, there's this strange proverbial kind of phrase, saying that he says to him. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Again, seems like a strange description, but this, as John says, is describing the kind of death that Peter is going to die. He's going to have to stretch out his arms, be nailed to a Roman cross, be led to his place of execution and killed. And that's exactly what happened to Peter. Well, according to tradition, he was crucified under Emperor Nero about 30 years later. Jesus said to Peter in verse 19, "Follow me." And he did. He followed him, not just doing what he said, but followed him to the cross. And if we're going to be Jesus' disciples, following him just as Peter did, we need to be willing to be shamed, disgraced, even to the point of death, as Peter was. But what does that mean in practice? Why would we do that? Well, this isn't just about doing kind of random, shameful things. This is about following Jesus even when the world despises you for it. This is about being shamed in the world's eyes, suffering for the sake of Christ so he is glorified. A couple of years ago, I was in Malaysia doing some teaching and training of Christians over there. And they were asking about Sydney, and I was talking about how, it's a beautiful place. And they were asking in particular just about some comparisons. And it was very clear that Sydney is a place that's full of beauty. We have great education. We have a significant amount of wealth. And one young Christian woman said to me, "How do Christians in Sydney suffer for Christ?" I was gobsmacked. I didn't quite know what to say. It isn't easy being a Christian in Malaysia, but what about Sydney? What about here in Caringbah? Don't get me wrong. We see people suffering, Christians suffering with illness, with bereavement, relationship breakdown. And of course, suffering with endurance, perseverance, and faith is a central part of being a Christian, being able to bear up under these things. But this is talking about a different, distinct kind of suffering. This is suffering for the sake of Christ, for his glory, being willing to be despised because you're a follower of Jesus. And usually it's not dramatic. Usually it's reputational, it's relational, it's quiet. It means living such a righteous life that you don't fit. People notice that you're different, even to the point of ridiculing you or excluding you or passing you over for opportunities. I spoke to someone recently who he found that when he was drinking with his non-Christian friends, he was always going to the point of drinking too much. And so he decided, look, when I'm with my non-Christian friends, I'm not going to drink. And he was afraid. He thought, oh gosh, now I've got to tell my non-Christian friends. And for him, that was shameful. He didn't know how they'd respond. It was a risk. Now, thankfully, his friends actually responded pretty positively. But that was a risk that he was willing to take for the sake of his godliness. I spoke to someone else a little while ago who narrowly missed out on an opportunity for promotion, because in the interview process they asked him some particular questions about what he thought about sexuality and gender. Now for you it might mean pressure from unbelieving family members when you insist on being at church or living by biblical values. But it's not just living for Christ, it's also speaking for Christ. And by that I mean witnessing to him, boldly witnessing to him, being open about the fact that you're a Christian, being open about the fact that you go to church, that you're a Christian, and actually, why don't you come and see? Let me tell you about my faith, about what Jesus means to me. Come and see Jesus. Now again, I'm encouraged, always encouraged by stories of people sharing about the hope that they have, about being open Christians. It always takes some courage, but we've got to be willing to be ashamed for the sake of Christ's glory. We started this morning by thinking about that sense of being exposed, that shame. But Jesus meets us by the fire with that warm, welcoming breakfast to welcome us in and put us again into a place of honour. And so that allows us to be so secure in Jesus that we are then able to live in a way that's risky, live in a way that looks shameful in other people's eyes, to follow in Jesus' footsteps even when it hurts. And so this week, let's rest in Jesus' mercy and follow him, whatever it takes, whatever it leads to. Amen.